The attack didn't destroy them. It simply started a timer. 6 minutes later, the universe changed its mind about war. And when humanity finally responds, nothing is left to argue with. There is a moment exactly 6 minutes after an attack begins when humanity decides whether he still exists. Not before, not during, not in the chaos of the first strike or the confusion that follows it. But after, once the noise settles just enough for a decision to become something final. It is not hesitation, it is confirmation. Humanity does not rush into reaction. Humanity verifies, calculates, and then commits with a kind of quiet certainty that leaves no room for correction. The Zyrr collective did not know this, and if they had, they might have paid more attention to the silence that followed their first volley. Not the absence of sound, because space is always silent, but the absence of response. The human outpost designated Listening Post Echelon-7 hung at the edge of a forgotten system. A place with no strategic value to anyone who didn't understand what listening posts actually did. There were no planets worth mining, no trade routes worth guarding, just a dark stretch of space, and a station that seemed too small to matter. Inside that station, Lieutenant Mara Vance was bleeding, not in a dramatic way, not the kind of injury that inspired heroic speeches, but in the slow, inconvenient way that made everything harder. A thin line of blood traced down from a temple to a jaw, and fell in small, steady drops onto the console beneath her. Each one a quiet reminder that something had already gone wrong. She didn't bother wiping it away. Her left arm trembled as she forced a manual override into a system that should never have needed one. And her voice, when she spoke, carried a dry, almost irritated tone. "Of course," she muttered. "Of course today is the day everything breaks." The first impact had thrown her across the room. The second had taken out half the external sensors. And by the third, she had already reached the only conclusion that mattered. This wasn't debris. This wasn't a system malfunction. This was deliberate. She pulled the external feedback online piece by piece, static clearing just enough to reveal shapes forming in the dark. 4 ships, sleek and curved in that distinctly Zyrr design language, organic lines wrapped around something that was built to kill. Mara stared at them longer than she needed to, not because she was afraid, but because she was confirming something she already suspected. "Test strike," she said quietly, the words carrying a kind of resigned understanding. Not an invasion, not a war, just curiosity backed by weapons. Somewhere out there, someone had decided to see what would happen if they poked something they did not understand. Mara leaned back slightly, ignoring the way the station shuddered around her, and closed her eyes for just a second. Not to rest, but to think. She had read the files. All of them. Even the sections that most people skipped because they sounded excessive, or paranoid, or unnecessary. Especially those sections. Her hand moved slowly across the console until it hovered over a recessed switch, protected by a clear shield. There were no alarms attached to it, no warning lights, no urgent messages telling her not to press it. Just a small engraved label that read "Silent Protocol Authorization Required." She paused, and for the first time since the attack began, something like hesitation touched her expression. Not fear, not doubt, but awareness. Once this was activated, whatever happened next would no longer belong to her. Another impact rolled through the station, deeper this time. Something structural giving way with a long metallic groan that echoed through the walls, like the station itself was trying to complain. Mara opened her eyes again and let out a quiet breath. "Yeah," she said under her breath. "That tracks." She lifted the protective cover and pressed the switch. Nothing happened, not immediately. No alarms, no countdown, no dramatic system change. Just a single green light that blinked once and then went still. 6 minutes. That was all. Back on the Zyrr command vessel. Overseer Talek watched the outpost begin to break, apart under sustained fire, with the calm confidence of someone who had done this before and had never once been surprised by the outcome. "Minimal resistance," one of his officers reported, voice steady, almost bored. Talek inclined his head slightly, expected another impact, scattered fragments of the station into open space, pieces drifting away slowly, as if even destruction here refused to be hurried. "They are not returning fire," another voice noted, and there was a hint of confusion there now. A small crack in the expectation of how this was supposed to go. Talek allowed himself a faint expression that might have been amusement. "They are miners," he said, as if that explained everything. He did not notice the absence of a response timer, did not question why nothing about this situation felt reactive. Minute 1 passed without incident. Inside Echelon-7, Mara secured herself against the console as the artificial gravity fluctuated, her breathing steady in a way that came from long experience rather than calm. She was not relaxed. She was prepared. Minute 2 brought a shower of sparks from a damaged panel beside her, and she flinched slightly, more annoyed than alarmed. "Really?" she muttered. Now, Minute 3 saw the Zyrr ships adjust formation, drifting closer with the growing confidence of predators who had already decided the outcome. Minute 4 passed as Mara checked the system logs, confirming what she already knew. Signal transmitted. Receipt confirmed. No response yet. Of course not. Humanity did not respond immediately. Minute 5 arrived with a shift in the Zyrr fleet's posture. "Prepare boarding craft," Talek ordered, curiosity pushing aside caution. One of his officers hesitated, just for a second. "Commander, there are still active systems. They are failing," Talek replied calmly. "And I am curious." Curiosity, in that moment, became the most dangerous decision anyone on that ship would make. Minute 6 arrived without announcement. The universe did not change in any obvious way. There was no explosion, no sudden arrival of reinforcements, no dramatic shift in the battlefield. What changed was something smaller, quieter, and far more absolute. The waiting stopped. The first sign was a flicker across a console on the Zyrr command deck. Talek frowned slightly. "Report." "Minus systems fluctuation," an officer began, but the sentence ended abruptly as the display went dark. It came back a second later, then failed again. Across the fleet, systems began to stutter. Navigation controls lagged, targeting array failed to lock. Communications flickered in and out of coherence. "Is this interference?" someone asked, the question carrying a rising edge of concern. "No external source detected," came the reply, and that answer was worse than any alternative. Talek stood slowly, his attention sharpening as the situation slipped outside the boundaries of exhortation. On Echelon-7, Mara saw the confirmation appear in the logs. A quiet handshake request that identified itself without ceremony. "TERRAN," command. She allowed herself the smallest possible smile. Right on time. Back on the Zyrr vessels, confusion began to turn into something else, something heavier. Weapons offline. Navigation not responding. Command uplink lost. Talek's voice cut through the noise, firm and controlled. "Restore systems." No one said what they were all beginning to understand. This was not a failure they could fix. Somewhere far beyond the system, humanity had received the signal, verified it, and made a decision that did not involve sending ships or issuing warnings. Instead, they reached into the Zyrr command network and removed it with surgical precision. Not violently, not chaotically, but methodically, severing connections, isolating nodes, collapsing the structure that held the fleet together. It was not an attack in the traditional sense. It was erasure. Talek stared at his dead console, and for the first time in his command career, something unfamiliar settled into his thoughts. Not fear, not panic, but understanding. "This," he said slowly, "was not an outpost." On Echelon-7, the firing had stopped, the shaking had faded, and the station, damaged but intact, drifted in the same quiet darkness it had occupied before the Zyrr arrived. Mara leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes as the adrenaline finally began to drain away, leaving behind a deep, steady exhaustion. She knew what would follow: the reports, the analysis, the quiet classification of the event as resolved. Somewhere in Zyrr space, entire command structures would be rebuilt, doctrines rewritten, questions asked that had no satisfying answers. And at the center of it all would be a single, unavoidable realization. They had not attacked a defenseless outpost. They had triggered a response designed long before they arrived, and they had done it without understanding that for 6 minutes. The universe had been giving them time to reconsider. The warning was written in every known language, including theirs, and it was not hidden, not encrypted, not buried beneath layers of translation errors or diplomatic ambiguity. It was simple, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. Protected under TERRAN law. Commander Irexol read it once, then again. Not because it was complex, but because it was so unnecessarily clear that it almost felt insulting. He stood on the bridge of the Korthon warship Dominion Spear, arms folded behind his back, posture perfectly composed in the way of someone who had never once needed to question a decision after making it. "Posturing," he said finally, his voice calm, dismissive, certain. Around him, the bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as officers monitored the human mining colony below. A cluster of industrial structures clinging to the surface of a barren rock that barely deserved to be called a world. No defense platforms, no fleet signatures, no heavy weapons. Just machinery, heat signatures, and life signs that moved in predictable, unthreatening patterns. Scan confirms minimal resistance capability, his tactical officer reported. No active military presence detected. Irex inclined his head slightly. Then the warning is irrelevant. On the surface of the colony, Daniel Reyes wiped a streak of grease across his sleeve and squinted up at the sky where 9 ships hung, like dark marks against the thin atmosphere. He didn't react the way people imagined they would in moments like this. There was no sudden panic, no frantic shouting, no dramatic realization, just a quiet, tired exhale. Of course, he muttered, almost to himself. It's always 9. Behind him, the colony continued to function for a few more seconds in the illusion of normalcy. Machines grinding, voices carrying overcome channels. The steady rhythm of work that didn't yet know it was about to stop. Then someone else saw them. Then someone else realized what they meant. "You seeing this?" a younger technician asked, voice tight but controlled. Reyes nodded without looking away. "Yeah," he said, "I'm seeing it." He walked toward the central terminal at a measured pace, not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear had never once made anything faster. "What do we do?" the technician asked. And there was something in that question that wasn't just about procedure, but about expectation. The assumption that someone, somewhere, had already planned for this. Reyes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up the system interface, scrolling past standard emergency alerts, past evacuation protocols that would not matter if the ships above decided to fire again, past layers of response that felt suddenly insufficient. He kept scrolling until he reached something most people never touched, something buried deep enough that it almost felt like it didn't belong to the same system. Protocol Black Glass. He stared at the words for a moment, the name itself carrying a weight that hadn't meant anything to him before. "You ever read this?" he asked quietly. The technician shook his head. Reyes gave a small, humorless nod. "Yeah," he said. "Me neither." He tapped the option, and a prompt appeared instantly, clean and clinical. "Authorization required." For the first time since the ships appeared, Reyes hesitated. Not out of uncertainty, but because understanding arrived all at once, sharp and irreversible. "This isn't defense," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Above them, the first strike hit, a controlled blast that tore into one of the outer structures and sent a ripple of force across the colony. The ground trembled, dust fell from overhead supports, and the illusion of safety collapsed in a single moment. Sirens began to scream, loud and insistent, but they felt late, like an afterthought. Reyes closed his eyes briefly, then entered the authorization code. Far above the system, hidden in a place no one had thought to question, something inside. The star woke up. At first, nothing changed. The Corthon fleet continued its assault with the same precise efficiency, each strike calculated, each movement deliberate. "This is easier than expected," one of the officers on the Dominion spear remarked. Irex did not respond immediately, but there was a faint satisfaction in his posture. "Because they are weak," he said. Then the star flickered. Not visibly, not in any way that could be seen with the naked eye, but to the sensors feeding data into the bridge systems. Something was deeply wrong. "Commander," an officer said slowly, "we are detecting the reading cut out into navigation systems, recalculated automatically, adjusting jump routes in real time as they always did, except this time the adjustments did not stabilize. They shifted again, then failed entirely." "Report," Irex said, his voice still controlled but sharper now. "Jump vectors are unstable," the navigation officer replied. "FTL lock cannot be established." Irex frowned slightly. "Override it." "We can't," came the answer, and this time there was no mistaking the edge of unease, because the problem was not mechanical. It was not interference in the traditional sense. It was something deeper, something structural. Inside the star, the human construct activated fully, not as a weapon in the conventional sense, but as a tool designed to reshape the rules of movement within the system. Jump corridors collapsed, not violently, but definitively, folding inward until they no longer existed as usable paths. Transit vectors warped, then vanished. Escape routes, every calculated exit from the system, simply ceased to function. On the colony surface, Reyes looked up again, watching the ships as they continued to fire, but something about their movement had changed. "They're not moving right," the technician said quietly. Reyes nodded. "Yeah," he replied. They're not leaving. Back on the Dominion sphere, the shift from control to uncertainty became impossible to ignore. All exit vectors are compromised. FTL systems cannot achieve lock. We are contained within the system. Irek stepped forward, gripping the edge of the command console, his mind working through possibilities that no longer applied. That is not possible, he said, but the statement lacked conviction now, because it was happening. A transmission cut through the rising noise on the bridge, clear, stable, unmistakably human. Commander Irak Saul, the voice said, calm and precise. You ignored a protected designation. Irex did not respond immediately. You are now contained. The word lingered in the air. Contained, he repeated. Yes, the voice replied. Your systems will remain operational. Your personnel will remain alive, but you will not leave. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Irix looked out at the stars beyond the viewport, at the same distant points of light that had guided navigation for generations. They looked unchanged, but they were no longer pathways. They were boundaries. On the colony below, Reyes let out a slow breath, tension easing just enough for him to feel how much had been there. Protocol Blackglass, he said quietly. The technician glanced at him. What does it do? Reyes watched the immobilized fleet above, 9 ships that had arrived with certainty, and now hovered with nowhere to go. It makes sure they remember, he said. And somewhere beyond the system, humanity recorded the event, not as a victory, not as a battle, but as a resolved incident. Another example filed away in a long history of responses that were never rushed and never forgotten. The station had no life signs, and that was the first sign something was wrong. It drifted in silence, its hull intact, its systems faintly active, just enough to suggest it had not been abandoned long ago. To the scavenger fleet of the Rethar, that meant opportunity. To Captain Lurak, it meant something else entirely, though he could not yet name it. He stood on the command deck of his vessel, staring at the derelict human station rotating slowly against the void, and felt a faint, persistent discomfort settle beneath his thoughts. No distress signal, his officer reported. No signs of battle, no debris field. Lurak tilted his head slightly. And no crew, none detected. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Human structures were rarely left intact without reason. Still, protocol or rather, Prophet demanded action. Prepare boarding team, Lurak ordered. The docking procedure was smooth, almost too smooth, as if the station itself was allowing it. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor beyond that was dim but functional, lights flickering in a slow, uneven rhythm. No bodies, no damage, just emptiness. The boarding team moved cautiously, boots echoing against metal floors that had not heard footsteps in some time. This is wrong, one of them muttered. Lurak did not disagree, but he pressed forward anyway. Curiosity had already made the decision. They moved deeper into the station, passing workstations still powered, screens displaying logs that updated in real time as if someone had been there moments ago. One of the crew reached out and tapped a console. It responded instantly. Systems are active, he said. Then where are they? Another asked. No one answered, because the question had no comfortable answer. Then the first door closed behind them. Not loudly, not suddenly. Just a quiet, deliberate slide that sealed the corridor. The team turned. Captain. Another door closed ahead. Then another. One by one, the station began to change, pathways narrowing, routes disappearing, as if the structure itself was deciding where they were allowed to go. Lurak felt it then, that unnamed discomfort sharpening into something clearer. We are not exploring this station, he said slowly. It is directing us. A faint sound echoed through the corridor. Not mechanical, not quite. A voice, distorted, fragmented, human. Logs began to play across nearby screens. Overlapping, out of order, fragments of conversations, warnings, routines, all stitched together into something that felt intentional, but incomprehensible. The crew shifted uneasily. We should leave, someone said. Lurak nodded. Agreed. Return to the exit route was gone, replaced by a sealed bulkhead that had not been there before. Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating. Then the lights stabilized. The flickering stopped. Every screen in the corridor changed at once, displaying a single line of text. Signal acquired. Transmitting location. Lurak stared at the message, understanding arriving too late to matter. This was not abandoned, he said quietly. It was waiting. Somewhere far beyond the station. a signal cut through space, precise and unmistakable, carrying with it the exact coordinates of the Rithari fleet. And for the first time since stepping aboard, Lorak felt something he had not allowed himself before. Not curiosity, not caution, fear, because now, whatever came next, was no longer their choice. They had 40 minutes, and they wasted the first 39 pretending they were still in control. That was the part Commander Alina Ward would remember most clearly. Later, not the weapons fire, not the tension, not even the moment the balance of power shifted, but the quiet certainty with which the attacking fleet believed the outcome was already decided. The human research station, Argus 12, was small by any measurable standard, a cluster of modules orbiting a dim star at the edge of mapped space. It had no visible defenses, no stationed fleet, no reason to draw the attention of a war fleet large enough to blot out half the sensor grid. And yet, there they were. 15 alien warships, precise information, weapons charged. BROADCASTING. Authority like it was something that could be enforced simply by declaring it. On the station's command deck, Alina stood with her hands resting lightly on the console, posture relaxed in a way that was not natural but practiced. She had already run the numbers, already understood the situation, already accepted the part she needed to play. Incoming transmission, her comms officer said. Alina nodded once. Put it through. The alien commander's voice filled the room, sharp, confident, rehearsed. Human installation, you are in violation of territorial claim. Power down, and prepare for occupation. Resistance will be met with immediate destruction. Alina listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged. When the message ended, she let a small pause stretch just long enough to feel deliberate. We'll need time to comply, she said calmly. Across the void, the alien commander frowned. This was not the response he expected, but it was not resistance either. You have 3 minutes, he replied. Alina almost smiled. We'll need more than that. The request was absurd on its face, but it introduced something more valuable than agreement. Delay. And delay, in this moment, was everything. While the negotiation continued, while words moved back and forth in carefully measured tones, a separate process had already begun, one the alien fleet could not see, could not detect, could not even imagine. The moment their ships entered the system, their trajectory had been logged. Their approach vector traced backward through space, calculations running silently to determine exactly where they had come from. Humanity did not wait for confirmation. Through conversation, it confirmed through data. Minutes passed 10, 20, 30. The alien commander grew impatient, his tone sharpening with each exchange. Your delay is noted, he said, irritation breaking through his composure. You are in no position to negotiate. Alina leaned slightly closer to the console, her voice steady, almost conversational. We're not negotiating, she said. We're waiting. The words hung there, meaningless to him, but precise in their truth. Because somewhere far beyond the system, the response had already been authorized. Not a fleet dispatched in reaction, not ships rushing to defend Argus 12, but something far more decisive. The origin point of the alien fleet's home system had already been reached. 39 minutes into the encounter, the alien commander received an alert. At first, he ignored it, focused on the station in front of him, on the assumption that control was still his to exercise. Then the second alert came. Then the third. His attention shifted. Report, he demanded. The response came slower than it should have, hesitation creeping into the voice that delivered it. Commander, our home system. A pause, the kind that carried more weight than any immediate answer. It is surrounded. Silence followed, thick and disorienting. The commander turned back, toward the human station, something unfamiliar rising beneath his certainty. What have you done? Alina straightened slightly, her expression unchanged. But there was something in her eyes now, something that suggested the conversation had already ended. We didn't do anything, she said quietly. We just didn't waste time. In that moment, the realization landed, not as panic, but as collapse. The war he believed he was starting had already been decided somewhere else, against a force that did not wait to be threatened before acting. The remaining minute passed without another word, because there was nothing left to say. The strangest thing about the attack was that the humans never fired a single shot, not one. No return fire, no defensive maneuvers, no desperate last stand broadcast across open channels. Just silence, steady and deliberate, as if the outpost had already accepted an outcome no one else could yet see. To the Verrex Dominion, it looked like weakness. To Commander Threx Val, it looked like confirmation. He stood on the bridge of the warship Ascendant Claw, watching the human outpost drift in orbit around a dull, lifeless moon. Its structure modest, its systems minimal, its presence insignificant. Minimal resistance, his tactical officer reported, almost disappointed. No active weapon systems detected. Threx folded his upper arms behind his back, the gesture one of controlled satisfaction. Then proceed, he said. Remove it. The first strike hit cleanly, a focused blast that tore through the outer ring of the station, sending fragments spiraling outward into space. There was no response. No sudden activation of hidden defenses, no countermeasures, no attempt to fight. Bacta's second strike followed, more precise, more confident, carving deeper into the station's structure. Still nothing. On the bridge, a few of the younger officers exchanged glances, not out of fear but confusion. Are they not going to resist? One of them asked. Threx did not take his eyes off the display. They cannot, he replied. If they could, they would have already. It was a simple assumption, and in most cases, it would have been correct. The third strike crippled the station's power core, lights flickering and then dimming as systems began to fail one by one. Internal compartments sealed automatically, but no distress signal followed. No emergency broadcast. No plea for assistance. Just a quiet, controlled shutdown. It's like they're letting it happen, another officer said, unable to keep the uncertainty out of his voice. Threx allowed himself a faint smile. Then they understand their position. The final strike came minutes later. A decisive blow that split the central structure and left the outpost drifting in broken silence. Its systems dark, its presence reduced to debris and shadow. The Verix fleet held position, weapons cooling, engines idling. For a moment, there was nothing to do but observe the aftermath. No survivors detected. The tactical officer confirmed. Threx inclined his head. Then the operation is complete. But something about the silence that followed was wrong. Not because it was unexpected, but because it lingered too long. Stretched out in a way that made it feel less like an ending and more like a pause. On the debris field where the outpost had been, a single automated beacon activated. It did not transmit a distress signal. It did not call for help. It sent a message. Encoded, directed, precise. On the bridge of the Ascendant Claw, no one noticed it, because it was not meant for them. Minutes passed. The fleet began to reorient, preparing to leave the system, their objective achieved, their assumption of superiority intact. Set course for the navigation officer began, then stopped. Commander. Threx turned slightly. Report. The officer hesitated, eyes scanning data that did not align with expectation. We are receiving multiple long-range contacts. Threx frowned. From where? The answer came a moment later, and when it did, it carried a weight that shifted the atmosphere on the bridge in an instant. Everywhere. The display updated, and the void filled with signals. Dozens, then hundreds. Emerging from beyond the system's edge, from vectors that had been empty moments before. Ships. Human ships. Not arriving in formation. Not announcing themselves. Not even accelerating into attacked positions. Just appearing, as if they had always been there, and had only now chosen to be seen. The scale of it did not register immediately. It couldn't, because the mind resisted accepting something that large, something that complete. How many? Threx asked, his voice quieter now. The tactical officer swallowed. More than we can count individually. The realization came, slowly, like something sinking beneath the surface of thought. This was not a response to the destruction of the outpost. This was something that had already been prepared. A contingency. A decision waiting for a trigger. Open a channel, Threx said. There was no answer. Not immediately. The human fleet did not rush to communicate. Did not issue demands or threats. They simply held position, surrounding the Verix ships in a silent, inescapable perimeter. Then, a signal came through. Clear and calm. Translated instantly into Verix Standard. Verix Dominion Fleet. The voice said. You have engaged and destroyed a TERRAN outpost operating under civilian protection statutes. Threx straightened slightly. It was undefended, he replied, the words sounding weaker than he intended. It did not resist. A brief pause followed, not of uncertainty, but of acknowledgement. Yes, the voice said. We know. Something about that answer unsettled him more than any accusation could have. Then you understand, Threx continued, pushing forward, that it posed no threat. Another pause, slightly longer this time. That was the warning. The words settled over the bridge like a weight. Around him, officers began to realize what he had not yet fully accepted. The lack of resistance had not been weakness. It had been intention. You destroyed a designated legal marker. The voice continued, calm and precise. That outpost existed to establish jurisdiction. Its purpose was not defense. Its purpose was to define consequence. Threx felt something tighten in his chest. Consequence, he repeated. The answer came without hesitation. You are currently experiencing it. The human fleet began to move, not aggressively, not with the chaotic energy of battle, but with controlled precision. Positions shifting just enough to remove any remaining illusion of escape. Weapons powered, not fired. Targeting systems locked. Not announced. It was not a threat. It was a statement. We will not destroy you, the voice said, almost as an afterthought. That would be inefficient. Threx stared at the display, at the impossible number of ships, at the perfect positioning that left no gaps, no weaknesses, no options. Then what will you do? He asked. The answer came softly. We will make sure you understand why you should have listened. In that moment, the realization fully formed, not as panic, but as clarity. The outpost had not fought back because it was never meant to. It had existed as a line, a boundary, a declaration that did not need to be enforced, until someone chose to ignore it. And they had. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was filled with meaning, with consequence, with the weight of a decision that could not be undone. Somewhere in the vast network of human command, this event would already be categorized, analyzed, and archived. Another example in a long list of moments where someone had mistaken restraint for weakness. And here, surrounded by a fleet that had not needed to fire a single shot to establish dominance, the Varric's Dominion learned the truth too late. Silence was never the absence of power. It was a space where power decided how much of itself to reveal. Humanity always asks once. After that, it stops asking. The message reached the TERRAN High Council at exactly the moment they were celebrating. The attack on the human colony had gone better than expected. Cleaner, faster, almost disappointingly easy. No prolonged resistance, no drawn-out conflict, just a decisive strike against a settlement that had, in their estimation, expanded too close to TERRAN-controlled space. It was a correction, nothing more. On the vast circular chamber of the council, light filtered through crystalline structures overhead, casting shifting patterns across polished stone, as the council members spoke in measured tones about territorial rights and necessary action. They did not think of it as aggression. They thought of it as maintenance. Transmission incoming, one of the attendants announced, interrupting the rhythm of controlled discussion. The chamber quieted slightly, not out of concern, but curiosity. External communications during a council session were rare, and rarely important. Source, one of the councillors asked. The attendant hesitated just long enough to draw attention. Human. That word carried a faint ripple through the chamber. Not fear, not yet, but awareness. Display it, the High Consul ordered. The message appeared in the center of the chamber, projected in perfect TERRAN script, the translation seamless, the tone unmistakably precise. Stand down. That was all. No elaboration, no threat, no emotional inflection. Just two words, delivered with the kind of clarity that suggested they were not part of a negotiation. A silence followed, brief and then broken by something almost like amusement. One of the councillors let out a soft, dismissive sound. That is their response. Another leaned forward slightly. They have just lost a colony. And they asked politely, a third added. The High Consul studied the message for a moment longer than the others. Not because it was complex, but because it was simple in a way that felt intentional. Is there more? He asked. No, Consul, the attendant replied. The message remained suspended in the air, unchanged, unadorned. Then we will respond appropriately, the Consul said, his tone measured, authoritative. Inform them that their presence in the contested region is no longer recognized. Further expansion will be met with force. The reply was composed, quickly, formally, wrapped in the language of authority and justification. It was transmitted without hesitation. Somewhere far beyond the TERRAN system, the message was received, logged, and acknowledged. And then, nothing. No immediate response. No escalation. No visible reaction. On the council floor, the discussion resumed, the interruption already fading into irrelevance. They will protest, one councillor said. They always do. Let them, another replied. We have already acted. Hours passed. Then another transmission arrived. Not to the council chamber this time, but across every major system within TERRAN-controlled space. Infrastructure hubs, military networks, civilian communication grids, all received the same signal simultaneously. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It simply appeared, overriding existing traffic with quiet authority. This time, it was longer. "Your refusal has been recorded," the message began. The tone was the same, calm, precise, devoid of anger or urgency. The initial request was not a warning. It was documentation. On the council floor, the High Consul felt something shift, something subtle but undeniable, as the weight of the words settled into place. "Documentation," one counselor repeated, confusion threading into his voice. The message continued. "You initiated hostile action against a civilian colony under TERRAN protection. You were given an opportunity to disengage. You declined." There was no accusation in the tone, no emotional charge, just a sequence of facts. As a result, response protocols have been executed. Across TERRAN space, systems began to change. At first, it was small, a delay in communications, a slight lag in data transmission, something easily dismissed as a temporary fault. Then navigation arrays began to fail, not catastrophically, but consistently. Ships attempting to plot routes found their calculations incomplete, their systems unable to confirm safe passage. Military networks lost synchronization, units operating on outdated data, commands arriving seconds too late to be effective. "What is happening?" one of the counselors demanded, his composure slipping for the first time. Reports began to flood in, overlapping, contradictory, but all pointing to the same conclusion. This was not random. This was coordinated. "Restore. Control," the consul ordered, his voice sharp now. Identified the source. But there was no single source. The disruption was everywhere, woven into the systems they relied on. Subtle enough to avoid immediate collapse, precise enough to prevent recovery. The message continued, its calm delivery cutting through the growing tension. "We are not disabling your civilization. That would be unnecessary." The choice of words landed heavily. "Not disabling. Not yet. We are restricting your capacity to project force beyond your immediate systems. Your expansion capabilities are now limited. Your military coordination will remain degraded until further notice." The council chamber fell silent as the implications unfolded. This was not destruction. It was control. "You asked what happens next," the message said, though no one in the chamber remembered asking. "This is what happens when we stop asking." The transmission ended. No signature. No closing statement. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows something irreversible. The High Consul stood motionless, staring at the empty space where the message had been. Around him, the counselors struggled to process what had just occurred. Their authority, their certainty, slipping in ways they had never experienced before. "They didn't attack us," one of them said slowly. "No," the consul replied, his voice quieter now. "They changed the conditions." Outside the chamber, across the vast network of TERRAN space, ships remained operational. Cities remained intact. Life continued. But something fundamental had shifted. They could not expand. They could not coordinate beyond a limited range. Their reach had been shortened, their influence contained, their future quietly rewritten without a single shot fired. Somewhere beyond their borders, humanity recorded the outcome. Not as a victory, not as a conquest, but as a completed process. A request had been made. It had been ignored. And so the next step had been taken. Not in anger, not in haste, but with the same calm precision that had defined the message from the beginning. Humanity had asked once, and when the answer came back wrong, it had simply stopped asking. The stars didn't explode. They didn't burn. They just went quiet at first. No one noticed. Not really. In the Lyran Dominion, the disappearance of long-range signals from a few border systems was filed under routine interference. Space was noisy. Systems failed. Civilizations liked to assume continuity, even when evidence suggested otherwise. So when the first 3 colonies lost contact with their relay stations, the assumption was simple: technical malfunction. Then, it spread, slowly, system by system. A silence moving through space, like a shadow, with no source. Within 48 hours, entire sectors of Lyran-controlled space were dark. No transmissions, no navigation pings, no military coordination signals. Just emptiness, where communication used to exist. On the command deck of the Dominion flagship Orax Prime, Admiral Zyrr stood motionless as the reports accumulated. "We're losing contact with the Cathari corridor," the communications officer said, "and the Velis relay chain is offline." Kes didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the tactical map, where clusters of systems were now blinking out, one by one, like a dying constellation. "Jamming?" he asked finally. The officer shook his head. "No known signaled interference. There's nothing to jam us. It's like..." He hesitated. "It's like the space between us is gone." That sentence should have sounded meaningless. It didn't, because something about the pattern felt deliberate. Too clean. Too structured. Across the Dominion, similar scenes were unfolding. Military bases reporting silent skies. Civilian stations receiving no incoming traffic. Exploration vessels dropping out of communication range and never reappearing on long-range scans. And in every case, there was no debris, no distress signal, no evidence of conflict, just silence. On the human side of the border, a single message had been logged 3 days earlier. It had been sent to the Dominion High Council after the destruction of a minor human science outpost at the edge of contested space. The message was simple. "You have entered restricted jurisdiction. Withdraw." It had been ignored, not out of malice, out of confidence. The Lyrans had seen the outpost as symbolic, not strategic, a warning sign mistaken for a wall. And now, the wall had closed. Back on Orax Prime, the silence was beginning to feel physical. "We are still receiving internal communication," the tactical officer reported, trying to maintain control in his voice. "But anything outside a 20 light-minute radius is gone." Kes turned slowly toward him. "Exclaim gone." The officer hesitated. No return signal. No echo. No response. "It's like the systems on the other side just stopped existing. In our network." That was when the first real fracture appeared in the Admiral's certainty. Not fear. Not yet. But doubt. The Dominion had fought wars before. Wars had enemies. Front lines. Escalation patterns. This did not resemble any of that. This resembled absence. Then the second phase began. Navigation systems started failing, not all at once, but selectively. Routes beyond certain thresholds could not be plotted. Hyperspace lanes that had been stable for centuries suddenly returned null results. Ships attempting to jump beyond internal sectors simply refused. No explosion, no damage, just refusal, as if space itself had declined permission. On the bridge, tension rose in waves. "We're being cut off," someone said quietly, "from everything outside Dominion core space." Kes finally spoke again, his voice lower now. "Who is doing this?" No one answered, because there was no target, no signature, no fleet, no enemy presence detected, only absence. Then, as if responding to the question itself, a transmission arrived, not on standard channels, not through military relay. It appeared simultaneously across every surviving Dominion system, overriding local feeds, station logs, and shipboard communications. It was human in origin. The same calm, precise tone that had been heard once before at the edge of the conflict. "Lyran Dominion," it began. "Your expansion into protected Terran boundary space has resulted in the activation of containment protocols." Admiral Kes felt something tighten in his chest. Not at the words themselves. At the implication that what was happening already had a name. "Containment," he repeated. The message continued, ignoring him. "You were previously instructed to withdraw. That instruction was not enforced. This is the enforcement." Across the fleet, officers looked at each other. Enforcement implied authority. Authority implied structure. Structure implied planning. This was not a reaction. This was procedure. "Your communication infrastructure has been segmented," the message continued. "Your external navigation has been restricted. Your interstellar coordination will remain degraded until compliance conditions are met." "Compliance," Kes said aloud now, voice sharper. "We are a sovereign Dominion." There was a pause, a fraction of silence inserted into the message, almost like acknowledgement. Then the voice responded, "Not within this volume." That line changed everything. Not because it was insulting, but because it reframed reality. This was not war. In the traditional sense, it was spatial authority. A civilization deciding where another civilization was allowed to function. Reports began flooding in again. Entire fleets unable to receive external commands. Colonies isolated. Trade routes collapsing not through destruction but through disconnection. And worst of all, nothing was firing. No retaliation. No visible enemy to systems quietly ceasing to connect beyond a defined boundary. On Orax Prime, panic was beginning to replace protocol. "We should respond," one officer insisted. To what? Another snapped. We don't have a target. Kes raised a hand, silencing them both. His eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, where the Dominion's once vast network now appeared fragmented, like an island chain slowly sinking into darkness. Show me the edge, he said. The map updated. A boundary line appeared. Not drawn by them. Not detected. Calculated. Everything beyond it was silent. Everything within it still functioned. Perfectly. Precisely. Deliberately. And it was moving. Slowly. Expanding. Not fast enough to be an attack. Not slow enough to ignore. Just inevitable. The message returned one final time. You are not being destroyed, it said. You are being isolated. Kes closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, something in his expression had changed. They never intended to fight us, he said quietly. No, the tactical officer replied, understanding now creeping into his voice. They intended to remove us from relevance. Outside the ship, the stars were still there. But between them, something had changed. The connections were gone. The pathways erased. The conversations between worlds cut. And in that silence, the Lyran Dominion realized the truth too late. You don't need to destroy a civilization that can no longer reach anything beyond itself. You just have to make sure it can't speak to the rest of the universe.